So what's your name?
My name is Loyd Ericson.
And where are you from?
Grew up in Sandy, Utah for the most part.
Sandy, Utah. What's that like?
It's good. It was a lot of fun. A lot of where I lived, a lot of people were moving in from California, so you get a little bit more diversity, a lot different from here where I'm living now in Orem, Utah.
Are you a BYU student?
No, I go to UVSC.
UVSC? What are you studying?
Philosophy and religious studies.
Philosophy. That's dangerous.
Some people think it's dangerous, but I guess it could be dangerous, and it has been dangerous. But it's something I enjoy. It's a passion of mine.
Do you know Dennis Potter?
Oh, I know Dennis.
Yeah.
Good friends with Dennis.
So, to what extent, talk a little bit about your church experience in terms of how you're feeling now relative to the church. Good, bad, indifferent.
My experience with the church has been a huge roller coaster. I grew up in a really conservative family, served a mission in Hawaii, all this fun stuff. And then maybe 3 years ago, I found myself having a lot of doubts to the point where I pretty much decided there was no God. Decided I was never going to step into a church again.
What led to this?
It's interesting. A lot of it was frustrations with different policy issues with the church fighting gay marriage, the church's reaction to the war in Iraq kind of bothered me. But those were never real issues to me, like declaring myself an atheist or anything like that. It was more just frustrations. And then just one day I woke up and just didn't feel anything anymore.
Had you had spiritual experiences as we recognize them in the past?
Oh yeah, I've had several of those, and they just all of a sudden just seemed like abstract memories that didn't belong to me anymore. And
did you redefine them, or did you just dismiss them?
I just forgot them in a lot of ways. I guess redefined. I just said, okay, well, it's just emotions from different, because I had a lot of my mission and whatnot. We just say, well, they're just emotions, or just coincidence, chance, stuff like that.
So the main issue, were there any issues you can pinpoint that led to this sort of you waking up one day and saying it's not what you thought?
Probably some of my studies in philosophy with metaphysics just kind of irked me a lot. Just the notion of, and maybe some epistemological, like, so can I really know anything? And those kind of issues kind of just dug at me to the point where, like, I just felt like the idea of God was just unbelievable anymore.
So philosophy is dangerous for faith.
It is dangerous, but at the same time, it can be redeeming because while this was a period of my life that lasted about 2 years, but through other different studying of philosophy and whatnot, I gained a different perspective on my religious beliefs, and now I consider myself an active believing Mormon. So
you're now an active believing Mormon?
Yeah.
Having felt you're an atheist and disaffected from the church. So
yeah.
How'd you turn that around?
Well, as far as being like, first I was like, there is no God, it's all whatever. I won't say a lie, but it's just people misunderstanding things, just whatever. But then I decided that hard atheist stance was just as, at least at that time, I thought was just as foolish as my, previous strong theist stance. And so I decided I'm just more of an agnostic. And one thing I really enjoyed being a part of the church. I mean, it was a culture that I grew up in, and it's something I didn't want to leave. And so I found myself just going to church on Sundays and just going, and, I didn't pray, I didn't pay tithing, I didn't do any of those things. I still lived the standards at that time. I, still never broken a word of wisdom, was being chaste, all that stuff. And I was just, I was going every Sunday, and eventually I met with my bishop, and I just let him know, like, look, this is me, I don't believe these things, but this is what I like. I loved the Book of Mormon. Even when I thought, it was just written by Joseph Smith, I thought it was just this phenomenal text that I just really enjoyed, and I just admired Joseph Smith like crazy and the work that he was trying to do. And so by doing that, just participating more, I eventually, and with some good friends and whatnot, I started having this desire to actually not just participate, but have that believing feeling again. And as I started getting that desire, it just led to me wanting to pray again and whatnot. And to me, that just led to some experiences and whatnot that made me just feel like, wow, there is a God out there who does answer my prayers. I still still have doubts at times. I still have plenty of frustrations with the church here and there, but I consider myself a believing, active Mormon now. Though sometimes other people might question that, but at least that's the way I feel.
Do you have any role models or people that have been influential, or books in helping you go from disbelieving, disaffected? Are there anything that's been helpful on that journey?
I'd say the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein was really influential, just at least dealing with those metaphysical issues I had problems with. Some instructors I've had at UVSC, Dennis Potter, Brian Birch, they're both really good friends of mine and people I've been able to talk to a lot about these issues. Other books, D.Z. Phillips, who was a professor that I was hoping to study before he died with last year. Some of his writings helped me out a lot. And just talking with people. Once I found he became really open with things. When I was bearing stuff, nothing ever got dealt with. But when I started talking with people and just being honest with the way I felt, I think that, if anything, helped the most.
Have you been exposed to Sunstone or Dialogue at all?
Oh yeah, I've probably started reading Sunstone a year or so after my mission, so that was 6 years ago. And then I've been going to the symposiums the last 4 years.
Was Sunstone part of what contributed to your challenges and disbelief originally?
No, I would say, if anything, Sunstone gave me a forum where I felt like, okay, here are other people that share these same frustrations, and here are people that are still active, still believing, or people that are disaffected or whatever. But it gave me a place where I realized, hey, I'm not alone with these feelings. And so I wouldn't say it led to the disaffection at all. I mean, if anything, it led to my disaffection. It was more just more of that metaphysical, philosophical, just waking up one morning and just like, what's going on?
Have Sunstone or Dialogue been in any way helpful?
Yeah, they've been helpful in the way that, like I said, one, it gave me a place where I felt like, okay, I'm not alone with these questions. I'm not alone with these frustrations. And, and you could see that there's people who dealt with it in a certain way and people who weren't able to deal with it. And you just, to me, it placed all my, it made me feel like, hey, it's okay for me to have these feelings. It's not something that has to be shameful, and helped me realize that, wow, there's a lot of people out here, and I'm sure, family and friends I might have that might feel the same way, but just in this culture, if you have doubts, it's a sign of weakness. And so it made me feel like, hey, I can have these doubts and it's not a weakness. In some ways, it could be a strength.
Do you have any sympathies for any groups or friends or types of people within the church that you see as being ostracized or alienated or disaffected or in any way not comfortable? Are there any groups or types of people that your heart goes out to and that you see struggling with their relationship towards the church?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're not the white male, rich, conservative, Republican, Mormon, I think you're ostracized in some way. And so, yeah, I mean, I have friends all the time, and unfortunately, I've had a lot of friends leave the church because they just couldn't stand being ostracized. And that's heartbreaking, and almost on a weekly basis, I swear, a monthly basis, I have a friend who comes to me and says they just can't handle going to church anymore. And my heart really goes out to them, whether it's homosexuals, women who just feel like they're too much, they're not, that they're just less than men in the church, which, you could say they are. Whether it's blacks who still feel like, or Hispanics, or whatever, any kind of minority feels like they're just not, people see them differently, whether it's people from another country that have language issues that don't get callings because people feel like they're stupid because they don't speak English well. I mean, all those kind of things I have sympathy for because, I felt that. And even people have different political views. I mean, that's one of my frustrations. Like, I feel like I go to Elders Quorum and everyone's touting how great, the President Bush is, or, holding a strong Republican line. You feel like if you disagree with them, then you're like worshiping Satan or something like that.
So today, what is your church experience like, good and bad?
It's here in Orem. as I've expressed to friends, I feel lonely a lot of times at church. I feel like, if you don't have, if you're a guy, if you don't come in a white shirt and tie, in a suit, and you don't have a faux hawk going with highlights in it, that something's wrong with you. You're not one of everyone else. And so a lot of times I feel like I'm going to church alone and feeling alone at church is because I'm not like everyone else. And so, but at the same time, I just come to accept that and realize, hey, if I stop going, if I stop really striving and having this desire, then it's all going to go downhill. So, I have a wonderful bishopric who really supports me. And they always reach out to me. And so, there's things I enjoy. There's things I get frustrated. I'm kind of well known in my ward as being the guy to raise his hand and object to whatever the Sunday school teacher is saying, or at least offer some different view or something to try to take the monotony out of church.
But you still feel welcome. You don't feel like that's made you feel uncomfortable or like a pariah. You felt pretty decently tolerated.
I feel tolerated. I think sometimes people see me as, oh, that's Loyd, who's going to, who might look a little different, or he wears sandals at church every Sunday. And so I think they, now have found me endearing, and maybe it's a little something exciting to find at church or something.
Was there anything you had to do to make them feel less threatened?
Well, a year ago, I got up in church, actually about a year ago this time, I got up during testimony meeting and just got up, and I just came out. And at that time was when I was set a lot of doubts and disbelief, and I just came out and said, look, I'm up here. I don't know if there's a God. I don't know if these people are prophets. I don't know these things, but this is what I love about the gospel. This is what I love about the teachings. This is why I'm here. And I think once I was honest with everyone in the ward, they came to realize, hey, he might feel differently, but he's got something to offer, and he's got this desire, and maybe they saw me as a project, who knows, but they seem to accept me more.
So being open and honest, worked out pretty well for you in that regard. Do you have any hopes for change? The church is guided by revelation. It's not us to advise the brethren or study the ark. But in your heart, do you ever have hopes for some type of improvement or change?
Oh yeah, I have to have hope for change.
You're Martin Luther King. Take us to the mountain of the type of church you envision.
The church I envision is a church that I think, one, is more socially involved. The church always says, oh, we're not involved with politics unless it's moral issues. But then for them, moral issues pretty much come down to gays and lesbians getting married. I'd like to see a church that is willing to stand up, maybe like President Kimball, when President Kimball, said, was against MX missile, but a church that comes out and says, look, we're against war. We are all for, helping out poverty and all that stuff, because, maybe in some ways a church more that I maybe ideally see in Joseph Smith and Brigham Young that really condemned the rich, and really wanted to make social change. I see a church that, and I'm not sure which direction, but where women become more involved within the hierarchy, within the priesthood, whether that means just, women have an equal share of the priesthood, or where the priesthood becomes more of something that's held by a husband and wife or between spouses or something like that. I see a church that comes out and just flat out says we're wrong, about blacks not receiving the priesthood, instead of just saying, oh, these things, these reasons aren't necessarily true, and coming out and saying, look, Brigham Young was a racist, he was a product of his time, and sometimes those things influenced bad things that happened, and blacks should have gotten a priesthood. It was a mistake, but we've corrected it. A church that's willing to say that its leaders are humans that are capable of making mistakes, because that's one of my biggest frustrations is when the church and the culture, the leadership and the culture and the members all combined keep this thing going where the leaders are always perfect. They never make mistakes. And I think that's just really dangerous. And so I see a future when church leaders are more willing and open, as other church leaders in the past have been, to say, look, we're humans, we can make mistakes. And that's what Revelation is about, is correcting the mistakes of our past.
What are your favorite things about the church, and what are the pillars of your testimony?
Favorite things for me in the church, I love the Book of Mormon. I mean, whether or not there was a man named Lehi who lived in Jerusalem who threw his family on a boat and came to the Americas, I don't know. But the text itself, to me, is a wonderful, beautiful text. The teachings in there, I still read the Book of Mormon almost every day, whether it's just a few bits and pieces here, but to me, there's something just powerful about that text. Joseph Smith is a huge, I'd say, part of the church for me. I've read, 10 or so biographies of him, and just trying to understand him more, and just seeing him as someone who was trying to do what God wanted to do. And yeah, he had his struggles, he made his mistakes, but to me, learning that Joseph Smith made mistakes and was struggling with things helps me understand my own stuff, because frankly, I have a hard time understanding what God wants from me, and I have a hard time doing what's right, and so I don't expect it from anyone else. And so I guess one of the pillars is seeing church leaders as people who are human, who make mistakes, is a huge benefit for me, because it helps me realize that, hey, I can struggle and make mistakes too, and still be pushing along.
Any other pillars of your faith?
I would say those are the biggest things, and just to me, what I feel is personal inspiration, revelation guide me a lot. When I started really believing, hey, I can receive these things. To me, if anything, that's probably the biggest pillar, because that's what influences everything else.
Anything else you want to say?
Not about pillars, I guess.
Oh no, just
about anything.
Yeah. Anything you came thinking you might want to share, a story or an anecdote or a homily or anything?
I'd say
no pressure. You can say no.
I'll say, I guess one of my biggest frustrations lately, it's just the issue of how the church is presenting itself. To me, there's a frustration, and I feel like the church runs itself largely by PR now. I think President Hinckley's has done some wonderful things for the church. To me, I personally think that like the whole mini temples was, it was revelation, because it brings the temple to those people who can't make it in large, at least for a lot of people who can't make it to the temple. It brings it out to them. But I have a frustration where I feel like where President Hinckley has largely been the PR guy for the church for the last 6 years, and that's how he started. And there's a frustration feeling like our church is so much led by PR now, by trying to please non-Mormons, even please Mormons, to make us, it's all about, oh, we're Christians too, and oh, we're so wonderful, and we're true Americans, and all this kind of thing, trying to sell the church as if it's some kind of business or club that everyone can join, trying to make it more appealing instead of just being more bold and brash. Like I said, when the war in Iraq started, President Hinckley came out, whereas Elder Nelson came out and gave a fairly strong anti-war message. President Hinckley came out and was like, we don't know these things. Yeah, war can be bad, but sometimes war can be good. And, and instead of making a big stance that might offend people, but I think the church needs to learn that, hey, we can offend some people, because if we're doing what's right, and if people who love war, people who love their wealth are offended, then so be it, because this is the gospel of Christ. And so I'd say that's something that's been on my mind a lot.